The United States has the most powerful navy in human history. It has 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, more than the next 13 nations combined. It can project military force to any ocean on Earth within days. But here is the paradox that almost nobody talks about. When it comes to the commercial ships that actually move the economy, the cargo vessels carrying the food, fuel, and weapons that a nation needs to survive, America is nearly helpless. The United States controls less than 3% of the world's commercial shipping fleet. It is a superpower that cannot supply itself. To understand how America got here, you have to start with a law passed in 1920. It is called the Merchant Marine Act, but everyone calls it the Jones Act. On paper, it is one of the most aggressively protectionist maritime laws ever written. The rule is simple. Any cargo moving between two American ports must travel on a ship that is American-built, American-owned, American-flagged, and crewed by American sailors. It was designed to do two things at once. First, it guaranteed a domestic shipbuilding industry that could produce vessels in peacetime and convert to wartime production when needed. Second, it ensured a reserve of trained American merchant sailors who could crew military supply ships if a war broke out. The logic was sound. In 1920, the memory of World War I was fresh. Planners understood that a nation that cannot move its own cargo is a nation that can be strangled. The Jones Act was America's insurance policy against that vulnerability. The problem is that the policy expired decades ago. Nobody told Washington. For a brief window after World War II, the system worked exactly as designed. In fact, it worked spectacularly. Coming out of the war, the United States operated the largest merchant fleet on Earth. American shipyards had built thousands of vessels during the conflict. American sailors were among the most experienced in the world. At its peak in the late 1940s and early 1950s, the U.S. merchant fleet comprised over 4,000 active vessels. American ships carried roughly 40% of the nation's international trade. The maritime industry was a point of genuine national pride. It was treated as what it actually was, critical infrastructure. But peak dominance has a way of creating complacency. And in the shipping industry, complacency is terminal. The decline did not happen overnight. It happened the way most institutional collapses happen, slowly at first, and then all at once. Through the 1960s, foreign competitors began building newer, cheaper, more efficient vessels. Countries like Norway, Japan, and Greece were constructing modern fleets with lower labor costs and aggressive government subsidies. American shipyards, protected by the Jones Act from direct domestic competition, but exposed in international markets, began falling behind on innovation. The cost to build a ship in an American yard was already 2 to 3 times higher than in Asia. Then came the 1970s oil shocks, which devastated shipping economics globally. American operators, saddled with expensive crews and aging infrastructure, were hit hardest. Federal subsidies that had propped up the industry for decades began shrinking. By the time the Reagan administration arrived in the early 1980s with its skepticism of industrial policy, those subsidies largely disappeared. The result was a straightforward economic death spiral. Without subsidies, American carriers could not compete on price. Without customers, shipyards could not fill order books. Without orders, yards closed. Without yards, there were no new ships. Between 1950 and 2000, the United States commercial fleet shrank by over 80%. Today, America has roughly 80 internationally trading commercial vessels. China has over 5,000. Greece controls a fleet that carries roughly 20% of all global seaborne trade. The United States, the nation with the world's largest economy, has effectively outsourced its commercial maritime capacity entirely. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does global trade. As American carriers retreated, foreign operators did not hesitate. But the story of who took over is not just about China or Japan or Greece. It is about a legal fiction that made the whole takeover invisible. It is called the flag of convenience. Under international maritime law, a ship's nationality is determined by the flag it flies, not by where it was built or who owns it. Panama, Liberia, and the Marshall Islands figured out that they could register foreign-owned ships under their flags for a modest fee, with minimal regulatory requirements and significantly lower labor costs. Today, Panama and Liberia together account for nearly 40% of the world's entire commercial fleet tonnage. Neither country has a meaningful domestic shipping industry. They are flags for hire. American shipping companies, suffocating under Jones Act requirements in domestic trades and uncompetitive in international ones, had two choices. They could die or they could reflag. Most chose to reflag. The ships did not disappear. The American ownership often did not disappear. But the American flag did. And with it went the legal classification of those vessels as national assets. Here is where the story stops being about economics and starts being about something more serious. In 2020, when the pandemic exposed every fragility in the global supply chain simultaneously, the United States discovered it had a problem it could not buy its way out of quickly. Container shortages, port backlogs, and shipping rate explosions were symptoms. The underlying disease was dependency. America was completely reliant on foreign-flagged, foreign-crewed vessels to move the goods its economy required. In wartime, that dependency becomes existential. The United States military's own assessments have repeatedly flagged the decline of the American merchant marine as a national security threat. To sustain a major overseas conflict, the Department of Defense needs a surge fleet of commercial vessels to move equipment and supplies. During the Gulf War in 1991, the United States had to charter foreign ships to move a significant portion of its military cargo because domestic capacity was already insufficient. That was 30 years ago. The fleet has shrunk dramatically since. If a conflict were to break out today in a region where foreign-flagged vessels refused to operate or where adversaries targeted commercial shipping, the United States would face a logistics crisis with no domestic solution ready to deploy. So if the problem is this obvious, why hasn't Washington fixed it? The answer is that the Jones Act has created a political trap that nobody can escape. The domestic shipping operators who benefit from it lobby ferociously to preserve it, even though the fleet it protects has dwindled to almost nothing. Shipbuilding unions protect the yards that remain. Any politician who touches the Jones Act gets attacked from both sides simultaneously. Reform it and you face labor opposition. Strengthen it without addressing cost competitiveness, and nothing changes. The law has become a monument to an industry that no longer really exists, preserved perfectly in legislative amber. Meanwhile, rebuilding genuine maritime capacity would require the kind of long-term industrial policy that American politics is structurally bad at executing. It would take decades and billions of dollars to reconstruct the shipyard base, train the workforce, and build a competitive fleet. The political cycle runs on 4 years. The maritime rebuild would run on 40 years. The United States can send a carrier strike group to any ocean on Earth in 72 hours. What it cannot do is guarantee that the commercial ships keeping its economy alive will show up when it needs them most. Military power without logistical sovereignty is an incomplete equation, and right now, America is missing half of it.